During the process, I've learned a great deal about the history of our government, about the current state of our country, and about the changes that you believe must occur to fix our serious problems. And you talk about all of these things in the book, but first I want to ask you, my first question is, tell us what you love most about America and why you've left your career as a doctor and chosen public service.
I think what's always fascinated me about our country is that people come here from all over the place. You know, Vietnam, China, Europe. Some of our ancestors came from Europe. They came from everywhere, but they came in search of something, mostly to get away from something, to get away from a big government. You know, we feared things like that. We feared tyranny and monarchy, and we formed a government to protect ourselves from an overzealous government. But people still flock to our country and have for 200 years at great peril. I mean, we have a family in Bowling Green that came from Vietnam at the end of the Vietnam War, and they were on a leaky boat with 300 people. You remember the boat people floating offshore, and it just fascinates people that people would go to such lengths to come here. And I think we need to do something to preserve that and not lose that in the mix of just spending so much money that we could destroy our country.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Your father is one of the most high-profile members of Congress today, and in the book you talk about your life growing up as Ron Paul's son. Why don't you tell us a bit about that?
Well, I still remember knocking on my first doors at age 11, you know, asking people if they would vote for my dad, and sometimes that was good, sometimes it wasn't so good. Sometimes you were chased by dogs, but it was a time to really, at a young age, start to understand about the politics of our country. When I was 13, I went to the Republican National Convention. It was a very close convention, and my dad was a supporter of Reagan. And seeing that up close and seeing that, you know, my dad came out of nowhere also, was just an ordinary citizen, came to be able to influence the debate, and ultimately probably allowed me to think that I could someday be part of the debate.
So you started thinking about public service at that age?
Well, I wouldn't say that. I was thinking about public events, you know, and current events, and, you know, what were the right and wrong answers, and why it was important to know in history what caused something, or to at least have an opinion about it so we don't repeat those things. You know, the Great Depression, we're still debating what caused the Great Depression, but it's important to know that because we're in the midst of a Great Recession now, and there are similarities to the same reasons we got in the Great Depression as to here. And if you don't understand that, you don't understand how to either get out of those recessions or how to avoid them in the future.
Mm-hmm. And that leads to my next question, which is, what's the biggest problem we face in the country at this moment, and how do we solve it?
I think without question it's the debt, and it's why the Tea Party came into existence, because they see this debt as becoming so large that we're passing it along to our kids and our grandkids. And really, I've come to the belief that the debt is so imminent a problem that it threatens our economy now. There's some saying that our debt is so large that it's costing 1 million jobs a year. It's harder to see those jobs. Now, the government, on the other side, the government will say, oh, we'll create jobs. You know, we'll hire 10,000 people to dig ditches, and you can see those jobs. But what you don't see is as government grows and as debt grows, that it crowds out the private sector, which is creating jobs that people really want. You know, they're the jobs that everybody votes on. I always say, when you go to Walmart every day, you're voting. Every time you take $1 out of your wallet, you're voting. It's democratic capitalism. You're voting whether Walmart succeeds or Target succeeds or Kroger succeeds or Kmart. You do that by voting with your dollars, and that drives the efficiency. But government doesn't work that way. Government dispenses its money to its friends. So if you give a lot of money to a politician, you may get a job from a politician. But that's not really, I think, the best way for a free country to work.
Mm-hmm. In The Tea Party Goes to Washington, to follow up here, you write about all the problems caused by big government, specifically the unnecessary government departments and the bloated government agencies. And I'd like to know, which departments do you think should be eliminated, and how much would be deducted from the deficit by these eliminations?
Right. Well, right now we're currently running a deficit of $2 trillion in 1 year. It's just enormous and I think unsustainable. The real compromise that has to occur in Washington, if you're ever going to tackle it, if you ever have any realistic chance of tackling it, is conservatives have to compromise and say there is waste in the military budget and that not every dollar in the military budget is necessary for our defense. But then liberals also have to compromise and say not every domestic spending program, not every program to help people is actually helping people, or that we have the money to do it. So they have to come together. There needs to be a meeting of minds. Conservatives and liberals get together saying we have to cut military, we have to cut domestic, and we have to look at entitlements. And it's not that I'm jumping up and down with glee wanting to cut people's entitlements. It's that I want the entitlements to exist for another generation. The only way they do, because we have so many people retiring, the baby boomers are retiring and people are living longer lives, those two facts make the current entitlement situation untenable. To preserve those, we'll have to look at entitlements too. So when you say which ones will have to be cut, everything has to be. There are certain things we would have to just acknowledge that maybe the federal government shouldn't do. For many, many years, Republicans believed that education should be done at the state and local level. The Department of Education now spends $100 billion, but there's no evidence that our test scores are rising. So really, it's not that I'm opposed to any government involvement in education. I just don't think it should be done at the federal level. It should be done closer to home at the state and local level.
In reading the book, I learned from the book that the Department of Education wasn't formed until the 1970s.
Yeah,
Is that correct?
Late 1970s, and Reagan actually ran the first time opposing its formation. We formed a lot of new things. And then even, like for example, after 9/11, everybody wanted to be safe. So what did we do? We put all of these things together under Homeland Security, and it became 10 times bigger than any department had ever become. But in the end, are we safer, or did we just get a lot more bureaucracy? We spend tons of money searching 3 million Americans that go through airports every day, but are we safer, or are we just more intrusive? And so I think these questions continue to come up, and the bottom line is you have to start asking, where does the money come from?
That's right. That's right. Okay, well, now that you work in the halls of Congress, can you tell us, is serious work being done on a daily basis in those halls?
I think people are recognizing the problem, and one of the senators the other day introduced me and he said the debate always was where to spend the money. Now at least the debate is on where to cut some of the spending. So the debate is shifting. I think people are recognizing it. The problem is on both sides, Republican and Democrat. I don't think they're thinking boldly enough, because the president's budget freezes this much of the budget, just the non-military part, at 2010 levels, but it will add $13 trillion to the debt over 10 years. The Republicans, I think, is better, but it freezes still just that small sliver of the budget at 2008 levels, but it'll add $11 trillion worth of debt over the next 10 years. My fear is that there could be a crisis in this country in the meantime, because I just don't know if we can sustain that much debt.